index finger forwards. What are your other three fingers doing? They're pointing backwards to you. So the message, the underlying message is there is, before you start throwing anything at anybody else, just think about how you might be responsible.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just for the sake of the recording, which I forgot to turn on just till now, we're on class number 4. We're talking about conflict, and we have just mentioned the idea that from the beginning of time, it has been the tendency of humans to not to accept blame upon themselves, but rather to deflect it upon to others. And this is the first kind of principle before we even approach a conflict, to have in our minds that if something happens to us, it's for us to look inwards and find within ourselves what that problem is that we need to correct.
There's just one other thing, because I just mentioned that when Hashem is investigating what's gone on, when Abel has been killed. No, just a minute. Wait, I'm trying to think what the reason was where God's confronting. No, I beg your pardon. It's with the apple. It's with the tree. Eating from the tree. Adam says, the woman that you gave me.
Yeah. So it wasn't only blaming the woman. God. Yes.
It's also God. It's certainly not his fault. It's everybody else who could be around.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah. It's almost incredible that someone could even say that. It's just so interesting, isn't it? And that is our tendency. It's just our natural tendency to do that. Yes. So we have lots and lots of teachings in Torah about conflict and about anger. And I'm just going to pick out a few, and perhaps more will come along as we progress. In Pirkei Avot, we are told that we should be slow to anger and easy to appease. On the other hand, however, you might think you should be slow to anger, fine, so hold it in, contain yourself. On the other hand, however, the Torah says, Lo tisna et achicha b'levavecha. Do not hate your brother in your heart, literally, which means, the commentaries tell us, it means do not bottle things up, basically. If you bottle things up, then you're going to destroy the relationship, because you're not going to deal with issues and you're going to eventually explode. So we're told, don't get angry, but don't bottle things up. So clearly, somewhere between those two, there has to be a sensible way of addressing the issues that get between us. And one of the fascinating pieces of research that I came across from John Gottman that I wanted to share with you was a psychology student, a 21-year-old psychology student who was working as a waitress in a restaurant, in a very fancy Viennese restaurant. And the waiters in that restaurant never wrote down any of the orders. They memorized them all. So the leaders have already read about this. So the waiters memorized the orders. And this student was just absolutely fascinated by the fact that they were able to remember such long and complex orders. And she watched and she observed and she talked to them, and she found that as soon as they had delivered the orders to their customers, they completely forgot them and could not remember any detail of the order at all. And continuing on this theme, they came to the conclusion, based on more research, there's something which is now called the Zeidman effect, which is that unfinished business occupies much more of our memory space than things that we have resolved. And that's just more evidence for what we probably already sense, which is that we want to deal with the things that bother us. But also, it's just so interesting that the things that bother us, the issues that we haven't dealt with in our relationships, those are the ones that we're going to remember better, and therefore they're going to cause more damage. It's not that we remember all the good times just as well as we remember the things that we haven't dealt with. No, we remember the things we haven't dealt with more than we remember the good times. So there's another reason why it's important to actually deal with the issues that come up as soon as possible. Okay, so now we get on to how. And I've made a kind of presentation which I thought I would share with you. So, by the way, just in advance, my husband helped me with this presentation. So all the nice, beautiful visual slides where nice things happen are the ones he made, and all the ones that are boring and flat are the ones I made, because he's really good at this stuff. So here we go. Give him credit where it's due. Just one moment. Here we go. How to do conflict. Okay. So, one second. How do you do it while you're on here? trying to, yes, here we go. Okay, so Jewish perspective. Can you see the whole screen? Thumbs up if you can see all of this, or just part of it. 1 second. Yeah, you can see all of it. Okay, so the first thing is that as we've talked about before, my ability to make choices is how I reflect God. God chooses, and he gave me free choice. So we have a choice whether or not to get angry. We have a choice how to approach our conflict. And taking ownership of this choice is a really important step. The next idea that we have here, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to get the vowels in for the Hebrew words. Avodah zarah. So avodah zarah is usually translated as idol worship. And we're told lots and lots of times in the Torah not to worship idols. And this to us probably seems irrelevant, inane, and old-fashioned. However, Rabbi Kellerman taught me an amazing insight in this. And one of the times that we're told about not worshipping idols is, our sages say, anyone who gets angry is as if he worshipped idols. So what does this mean? So the word avodah over here literally means serving. Zara comes from the root zar. Zar means a stranger. What's a stranger? It's somebody that you are distant from. It's someone that you don't have a connection to, someone that you don't know. And therefore, what is this service of strangeness? It means worshipping estrangement, worshipping the God of distance, the God of disconnection. So when it says anyone who gets angry, it's as if he is worshipping estrangement, meaning because whenever we get angry, we distance the other person. And therefore we become prey to the force of estrangement and disconnection, as opposed to keeping ourselves in tune with the forces of relationship and connection. And therefore, you can also understand that whenever the Torah tells us not to worship idols, for us in our day and age, it doesn't mean literally not worshipping idols. It means don't worship the forces of estrangement, worship connection. As we said in other classes, Judaism is not a religion, it's a relationship. God created us to give good to us, and he created us to have, therefore, a relationship with him. And similarly, we need to emulate him by also bringing closeness into our worlds through our relationships. Does that make sense? Any comments? Because I would like people to interrupt. I'm not getting enough interruptions.
We'll do better than this, won't we?
Okay, next point. Another idea, just to reinforce what we're saying, is that if you look at the word ish, which means a man, aleph yud shin, and the word isha, which means a woman, they're both very similar. They only have one letter different in each one of them. In the man's name, you have the letter yud, and in the woman's name, you have the letter hey. If you put the letter yud and the letter hey together, you get the name of God. If you take them out, you're left with aish, which means fire. Meaning that you can either have God in your marriage, and if you don't have God, what do you get? Fire. What's fire? What does fire resemble? Like an all-consuming something that just kind of eats everyone up, a very dangerous and a very, very powerful force. So I just found these concepts useful in thinking about anger and in thinking about conflict. Okay, so now we're going to think about the definition of a good fight, and I would like to redefine a good fight, because I think sometimes we would think that the word good and fight don't really necessarily go together. But if we think about the idea that when an issue comes up, if we discuss it properly, then we can come to greater understanding of each other, and it can bring a greater connection. And therefore, although a fight might be uncomfortable and might be something difficult, and it might be something very, very hard to do without anger, actually, if it ends with greater closeness, then that is a good fight. So I'm going to redefine a good fight as being something that ends with greater closeness. And if you think about it in that way, then the purpose of the fight is not necessarily to resolve the issue. And interestingly, if you look at research about marriage, a lot of issues get left unresolved, because a lot of issues repeat themselves again and again and again and again throughout people's marriages, because two individuals coming from very different backgrounds, with very different perspectives, very different life experiences, are going to have different perspectives and aren't necessarily always going to come around to the other person's point of view. They might come to a greater understanding, that would be a goal, but they won't necessarily get all the issues sorted out. Now, hopefully you can come to greater understanding, hopefully we can come to compromises, and hopefully we can resolve any issues that are solvable. But John Gottman says that some issues are not solvable, and therefore we can say that if our fight ends with greater closeness, even if it's not actually solved, then that could be a successful fight. Any comments on that?
I just thought also with a good fight, I don't know, sometimes you can just see it as just a clear the air session. You may not actually, well, you may not specifically resolve a definite issue, but you know, like it's the whole thing about not bottling things up, and sometimes you just need to get stuff out in the open in a way.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. And I think if your partner allows you to vent to them without taking it personally and without escalating, then that can contribute to a greater closeness. They're there for me. They're prepared to hear me, even when I'm frustrated. I think that can be quite powerful. What do you think?
One of the problems about a fight is that it's not just the effect that it has at the time that it's taking place, but there's an aftermath where it can easily generate resentment and stirred up issues that hadn't ever been thought about and were quite quiet and calm in the background, and suddenly they become an issue in their own right. So although a fight, if it works out satisfactorily, could be most worthwhile, it could also be terribly destructive.
Absolutely. So we're trying to say, what could a good fight look like? And that what you're describing is obviously not a good fight. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to try to get into how to kind of do a good fight. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so before we get into how to do it right, we're going to see what the danger signs are to look out for, and then we're going to say, okay, instead of doing these, what can we do instead? Okay, so danger signs. Harsh startup or criticism. So I think we've mentioned this actually in other classes, and it's actually, there are between 4 and 6 ways that this guy John Gottman predicts divorce with 94% accuracy. And one of the ways is, how often do people use a harsh startup? Now, don't get worried now, by the way, because it's only when all 4 of these things are done perpetually, along with 2 others, which we're not even going to get to mention today. So I'm not saying that, you know, if you start off with criticism and harsh startup, it means, God forbid, I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is we can learn a lot from what are the negative signs of arguments. So to try very, very hard to avoid these, that is already going to take us much further in our marriages. And when we've already got behind us the ideas of respect and the ideas of trust, and building on those and working on those, then it becomes much easier to avoid doing the following. But I just think that for our own knowledge, to know what the danger signs are is actually quite valuable. So a harsh startup or criticism, for example, you know, let's say you're at work and you missed a deadline. So your boss could say to you, hey, where are the reports you said you would file? You know, we agreed on a deadline. Could you, for once, could you get something done? So that would be a harsh startup, or critical, very critical. Alternatively, he could say, hey, I really need this done sooner. We agreed on a deadline for yesterday. Can you please get that done as soon as we can? Okay, so it's fairly obvious, really. But what's interesting is that very often the way you start off the conversation determines the ending. And that's because the way you start it has an impact on the other person. It doesn't have to be this way. I could start off by saying, you know, you didn't take the bins out. I have no idea what we're going to do with that leftover rubbish. I'm really annoyed. And can you for once remember to do something I asked you to do? And my husband could say, I'm so sorry. And then it ends it straight away. It takes all the heat out, the anger. As the Torah says, Mana rach meshiv chema, a soft response deflects anger. But even though people can do that, it's much, much harder for them to do that when they're confronted in a harsh kind of way like this. Okay, so that's danger sign number 1. Number 2, Francis, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're allowed to talk to each other privately, but I would so love to hear what you're saying.
No, we can hear something. I think one of our children's singing.
Oh, that's so lovely.
What's that noise?
That really is gorgeous. Okay, so the second real danger sign, which is the most scary danger sign really, is contempt. So what's contempt? Contempt means eye rolling. Contempt means anything that expresses inferiority of the other partner. So you know, for example, oh, I can't believe it, you're so stupid, you got that wrong again. Where's all my examples gone? Sorry, I'm so bad at examples that I've written them all down. I'm just trying to see where I've put them. Here we go. Right. Sarcasm, eye rolling, saying always or saying never, calling names, all of these things, you know, sneering. Often it depends on the tone. You could say the same thing and it is or isn't contemptuous. But contempt is a really bad sign. Next one, defensiveness, which is a very natural response to being confronted with criticism or contempt. It's just so natural for us to say, well, it wasn't really me, but if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done it either, you know, but you forgot to take the pins out last week, so of course I forgot to take them out this week. I mean, it's just, we all do it, you know, like, not in the natural response, defensive,ness, okay? And stonewalling means literally just ending the conversation. I cannot say anything. I'm literally stonewall. I completely ignore you. And that often happens because people get so flooded with negative emotions that they're not able to engage any longer. And you can see how each of these reinforces the other and creates a cycle, like a negative self-reinforcing cycle. And the more each person does it, the more it continues and leads one to the other. So these are the danger signs. Okie dokie. Where are we going now? Right. And a few things to just say, never do these. Never say you always this. Designed to create problems. Never say you never. By the way, they're not true either. It's never true that someone never or always does anything, as I try to tell my children. Never say the D word. Never say divorce. Never mention it. Why? Because if there's a way out, then I'm not committed to working on this, because there might be a way out. If there's no way out, then of course I'm going to work on this. I'm here forever, and we're going to sort this out. Okay, and never ever fight in public. Fight in public means never fight in front of your kids, never fight in front of the cleaner, never fight outside. Whenever there's anyone apart from yourselves, never ever ever do the fight. It's disrespectful, it's demeaning, it's everything. It's just so damaging, and for kids in particular, it is incredibly dangerous.
Yes, because it affects not just you two, which what we've been talking up to so far. It suddenly involves others, and depending on where it is, it could be a large number of people.
But it's not just that. Not only does it involve the other people who observe it, it also does more damage to your own relationship, because usually when we're in public, we guard ourselves. And therefore, if we're able to fight in public, then I don't know about you, but whenever I see how people behave in public, your automatic kind of thought is, if they're doing that in public, what on earth do they do in private? And so that's one part of it. And the other part is it conveys even more disrespect for your partner that you're prepared to show how you feel about them in that way in public, and it exacerbates the whole thing. It just takes the whole fight one level up, and therefore you just have to avoid it. Apart from all the Torah prohibitions, for example, lashon hara, and the pain that you cause your spouse, which is added by all the people seeing and all the rest of it. Apart from that, it's just we have to just kind of embed in ourselves these decisions never to do these things. Okay, now. Okay, we're going to see a clip from The Incredibles. Sorry, 1 second. Started already. Whoops. We're going to watch a clip from The Incredibles. It's fun, but it's also a lot to notice about it. So try to, as you're watching it, think about those 4 things that we just looked at. A harsh startup, the criticism, how criticism leads to contempt, how contempt leads to defensiveness, how all 3 of those reinforce each other, and see if you can think. I mean, it's quite a short clip. I don't know how many things people can think about, but if you can also think of alternatives, how they might have done things differently and what's going on there emotionally for each of them. Here we go.
I assumed you'd be back later. If you came back at all, you'd be back later.
Well, I'm back. Okay.
Shame.
Rebel.
It was just a little workout. Just stay loose.
You know how I feel about that, Bob. Darn you, we can't blow cover
The
again.
building was coming down anyway.
What? You knocked down a building?
It was on fire, structurally unsound. It was coming down
Tell
anyway.
me you haven't been listening to the police scanner again.
Look, I performed a public service. You act like that's a bad thing.
It is a bad thing, Bob. Uprooting our family again so you can relive the glory days is a very bad thing.
Reliving the glory days is better than acting like they didn't happen.
Yes, they happened. But this, our family, is what's happening now, Bob. And you're missing this. I can't believe you don't want to go to your own son's graduation.
It's not a graduation. He is moving from the 4th grade to the 5th grade.
It's a ceremony.
It's psychotic. They keep creating new ways to celebrate mediocrity, but if someone is genuinely exceptional,
This is
then
not about you, Bob. This is about Dash.
you want to do something for Dash? Then let him actually compete. Let him go out for sports.
I will not be made the enemy here. You know why we can't do that.
Because it'd be great.
This is not about you.
This is not about you. Yes.
Okay, so
It's not about you.
just trying to get back onto my. Okay, give me some reflections.
Well, when people get when people get,
Go on, just talk. All talk at the same time. Go on.
when people get excited and full of their own ideas and their own what they want to say, they shut out whatever is coming from the other person. Don't give the other person a moment and just blast out their own ideas.
Yeah, you can see it escalating. You can observe it escalating more and more as the clip went on. The pace and the attacks.
And the intensity and everything.
Yeah.
Yes, good. Okay, and so and also I think it's important to notice how she starts out with a harsh startup. She doesn't kind of say, "Oh, it's so nice to see you. I missed you." You know, she starts out with, you know, like, "It's so late. Where have you been?" The criticism was the first thing that he encountered when he got home, and then he responds defensively, and then she's contemptuous. She's like, "Oh, darn you," or something like that. And then he shows contempt towards her and escalates and escalates. And by the way, at the end of the clip, when you see the fluttering of the pages, that's their superhero kids who are hiding. And then it continues, and they're like, you know, "Come out, kids," and then they pretend to be all nice and lovey-dovey. So they also committed the crime of fighting in front of their kids.
No, they didn't know.
No, they didn't know. Right, exactly. They didn't know. Fair point. Fair point. Okay. Any other comments on that? But we'll perhaps use it to discuss a bit more as we move on to what alternatives are to the kind of 4 danger signs that we've mentioned. Okay. So, sorry, I have to mess with my screen so I can see my slide and all of you. Okay. I thought it was really important to just mention self-awareness here. And this is a class on marriage, and you could probably go on a whole course about self-awareness, but I kind of feel like you can't really engage in successful conflict if you don't have self-awareness. And I just thought I would share with you a tool that I've found extremely useful in just raising my own self-awareness when something is going on. And just a very simple tool is to use your body. So notice what's going on in your body. If there's an argument, notice, you know, am I tense? Am I getting hot? Is my mouth getting dry? What's going on? And also my posture, you know, am I sitting here with my arms crossed, or am I relaxed, or am I tense in the way I'm sitting, and what body language am I showing? And it's really important to be able to say, I need a break for 20 minutes, because as we mentioned last time, if we're in that emotional high heightened moment, then we can't think clearly. There's neurologically and physically, we all know that we are part animal, we're part soul. As animals, we have a fight or flight response. As soon as our stress levels escalate beyond a certain point, our logical brain is short-circuited in favor of a fight or flight response. And therefore, if my emotions get raised above a certain level, I have to be aware of that and to say, you know what, I can't actually talk about this now. Do you mind if we take a break for 20 minutes? Or do you mind if we talk about this tomorrow? Or whatever it is. That is an incredibly responsible way to deal with an escalating argument. It avoids the continual conflict. It avoids it getting much worse. So that, I just think, is kind of an important prerequisite, really. So yeah, I just thought I'd stick that in there, even though it wasn't strictly about marriage. Okay, so now to go on. What do we do instead of a harsh startup or criticism? We can use I statements. So we mentioned as well, we also mentioned this last time, meaning that instead of saying, you're supposed to be on a diet, why did you go out and buy pizza and chips again? I could say, I find it really hard to resist that food. I think it's really bad for me. Do you think you could avoid doing that? Do you think you could avoid buying it? When you include yourself in the problem, then it's not harsh. It becomes a soft startup and it's easier for the other person to take. The other thing you can do is to state a positive need. So instead of just raising a problem, say also what you want done. So like I said, I find it really difficult to resist that type of food. Could you not buy that in future? Or could you speak to me before buying it in future? And then you state the solution within the problem, and you're already halfway to getting it solved. I'm hoping this isn't sounding too simplistic, because I'm talking a lot and I'm not getting any feedback.
It's very good stuff, and there's no harm in hearing it a second, third or fourth time.
Okay, thank you.
I think the comment about delay is a very valid one. My fear,
What? Say that again? I missed it.
The delay, taking a step back and saying, can we talk about this later or tomorrow?
Yes.
My fear with that is that it will diminish the problem, and first of all, on a practical level, there won't be enough time, which is a 21st century problem. And second of all, it will diminish the problem, and therefore I won't feel like I've been heard. Because
you mean if that was
because the anger, the sting is out, and therefore I feel like I would be missing. I know this is unfounded, but missing an opportunity to address it, because it would be dampened the next time we talked about it. And I know you're going to say that's a good thing.
That's so interesting. But you only use that when you're in real danger of getting so caught up in the argument that you can't actually see any positive, that you just get overwhelmed, and you get like that Incredibles clip where you can't snap out of it because you're, let's say you're just so emotionally overwhelmed that you can't see any logic at all, and you're not able to step out of yourself, you're not able to see the other person's side, you're not able to address it in a way that you would want to, or your spouse isn't able to address it in a way that is going to be helpful for you. So you don't have to use that statement of taking a break only for yourself. It can also be if you notice that your spouse is getting so heightened that they're responding in such a way that you can't take it, and you're not going to be able to resolve this, and you're starting to get your emotions starting to go up, but you've already noticed that theirs have already gone way beyond the normal threshold. So then you can also use it for them. It's not only for yourself, it's also to stop. The point of it is to stop escalation. And the reason is because the danger of escalation, it can be so detrimental to our marriages that you think that, oh, I'm feeling this right now, the emotion's powerful right now, I need to deal with it right now. And that's fine if you're able to deal with it. But if it starts to escalate in such a way that you get those kinds of altercations where it's, like throwing the ball to each other, and it starts moving faster and faster and faster and faster, and you're not getting anywhere, then actually you're not going to solve anything. you're not going to come to a greater understanding, you're not going to come to greater closeness. So what would be the point? Now, I agree with you that there is a very real danger that the issue won't get resolved. And therefore, what you have to do if you decide to take a break is at the moment of taking a break to say, can we make a time to deal with this when we're both less emotionally involved? And then to put that time in the diary and make it happen, you know, set a reminder, because I think you're absolutely right. There's a very, very real danger of not dealing with it. But I mean, the idea of not being emotionally involved is just, I think if it were any other area of our lives, it would be so clear to us, you know, but because we're so emotionally involved, we think, no, I have to deal with it now. And there's that pressure. But, you know, if you're thinking about a work situation, you wouldn't dream of speaking to an employee or a colleague when you were in the midst of a fuming temper with them. You know, you just wouldn't do it. It would be so stupid. So we've got to kind of take a similar approach here. Our spouses deserve far more respect than anyone else in our lives. In fact, Rabbi Kellerman used to say to me, 99.9999% of the world, your reward in the world to come after you die is about your relationship with your spouse. I mean, he is a person who will say things in a very powerful way. But if you want to prioritize something, prioritize this one. This is it. Okay, does that answer it for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Great. Okay, any more comments, please? Okay, so we've said use I statements, so include yourself and, use I statements and include yourself. I've kind of repeated myself. No, I haven't. Okay, use I statements means saying, I find this difficult instead of you have mucked up. State a positive need, how it can be sorted out, and include yourself if possible. Okay, so we've said that. All right, now, instead of defensiveness, okay, this is really, really difficult. Instead of defensiveness, what can we do? Let's have some suggestions. I'm sure you guys have got some answers over here.
Be offensive.
That was the harsh startup. You're too late to be
In a positive way, of course.
Any other ideas?
Burst into tears.
Ooh, burst into tears. Ooh, that could be manipulative, couldn't it? It could be genuine though. It could be genuine as well. It could be you can't. There's nothing else you can do. Okay, all right, burst into tears. How does that help though? How's that actually going to help?
Well, it gives a time break for a moment. You know,
Okay, it could give some emotional release. Okay.
Yeah.
I think you have to use your active listening skills and not, as you said here, don't try to run away with the first ideas, but actually try to listen and understand. I think that's very true. Active listening and not just responding.
Right, exactly. So I think what the challenge is over here, when you've been confronted with a harsh startup, instead of responding naturally to defend yourself, you've got to actually see, like we said in the other sessions, what is that bid? Because really a harsh startup is just a bid. It's just somebody asking you for some attention, telling you their problem, trying to relay some information towards you, but they put it in the wrong way. They put it in a very unpleasant way, which makes it extremely difficult to hear. But if I'm not too emotional, then I can actually see the message beneath the message. Yes. So for example, with let's take The Incredibles. So he turns up late, and what's going on there, for anyone who doesn't know, is that they're supposed to be undercover. They're not supposed to show anyone their superpowers. So she's worried that he's somehow shown his superpowers, which puts them in danger because they're not allowed to do that. So she's worried about that, and she wants to protect their family. So he could, maybe, I don't know if this is entirely realistic, but I think for some of us this can be realistic some of the time, not all the time, just some of the time. He could have noticed that she might be worried, and that might be why she started off like that, and he could actually respond to the worry instead of responding to the harshness of how she started up. And he could say to her, I'm sorry, sweetie, you must have been so worried. And that would already reduce the whole emotional level several notches. And that would be a great way to start. Alternatively, if you move on further in the argument, what happens? Let me just think. So he could have said this at any point, or she could have said to him, instead of when he shouts back and says, oh, you know, the building was falling down anyway, she could have listened. She could have heard his need to fulfill what he felt was his potential to save the world. And she could have said to him, oh, it must be so painful for you to watch that tower, you know, going in flames or whatever it was, and not to actually be able to save it. I understand why you would want to save it. I understand that you have that need. So from either side, to respond at any point with an understanding of what the feelings are underneath the presentation is going to deflect and change the whole direction of the argument. It only actually needs one side, as long as there's willingness to respond to that. So it could still obviously be taken up a notch if the spouse decides not to respond to that, and just carry on angrily, but there's a much greater chance of reducing it. Does that make sense?
Good.
Yeah, one of the things about active listening, I think there's an idea that if you're properly listening, but you're not ready to respond or think about it, you have a sort of idea that you put the idea in a mental filing cabinet in the bottom drawer. And then when you feel ready to deal with that, you've listened to it, but you're not really ready to respond or know what you're how you feel about it. You then, at a better time, come up with that, think it through, and work out what you're going to do about it. You say take it out of your mental filing cabinet, basically, or in the modern parlance, you know, in the memory of your phone or something like that. But I think that's also a helpful idea, to stop you responding immediately and getting more upset, but think, well, yeah, all right, I'm going to listen, but at this point I'm not going to respond.
Meaning that you're saying that in that moment it might be too difficult to reflect the feelings and to acknowledge them because you're feeling overwhelmed, but actually you can still notice what's going on for the other person and try to address it later. Is that what you're saying? Very nice, very, very nice. I like that. Okay, so instead of defensiveness, listen, try to understand. And part of that is getting beyond our own egos, meaning that, yes, she or he insulted me and I'm annoyed, but you know what? It's not just about me. This is about us, and this is about our marriage, and this is about becoming closer. And there are lots of thoughts you can generate in your mind. He doesn't really mean it. Right now he's stressed, or she's had a hard day, or she's letting it out on me, but it's not really about me. And all those thoughts, or, you know, remembering a positive thing that happened earlier today or the day before, and keeping in your mind the knowledge that my spouse is really here for me. So in general, the more you generate the positive thoughts, then the more you'll be able to conjure them up, even in this moment of when you do feel defensive, then you'll be able to overcome that and actually try to be there and understand for the other person. Okay. Then understanding always has to be the first thing, but then it is important to also explain your position, because if someone's attacked you, if your spouse has attacked you, and you hear them out, and you hear them out, and you hear them out, and you listen, and you try to understand them, and you're there for them, but actually you didn't explain how you were feeling and what was going on for you and why you behaved in that way, then you may end up just feeling like the doormat. So it is important to explain your position also in obviously a respectful way. Paul, you're looking thoughtful.
No, I was just thinking, because like, you're explaining your position, so I'm just thinking of, I don't know, irrational versus rational, because, you know, what the other person might be saying you might think is completely irrational, and what your position is totally rational, but they may still not see it that way.
Always. My position is always 100% rational, and anyone else is always completely ridiculous. Yes, that's absolutely fine, but that's again, you have to consider that that what's going on here is always the language of relationships is feelings, not truth. So you've got to tune into what the feelings are, and then it doesn't matter if you think the feelings make sense or not. Feelings are feelings, and therefore they are valid because the other person is feeling them, whether you think they're valid or not. So it may be that the other person makes absolutely zero sense to your mind, if you don't mind me saying, or to my mind, they make no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. But if they're feeling that and I relate to the feeling, then I can start to get a little bit beneath the presentation, which is just ridiculous, and get to the feeling underneath. We do, I think, generally parents who are trying their best do this a lot of the time with the kids. So, you know, my teenage son says about my 5-year-old daughter, well, it makes absolutely no sense what she's doing. You know, she wants this, I gave it to her, and she's still screaming. Why is she still screaming? It makes no sense. She's not behaving normally. She said she wanted this and this and this and this and this. We gave for all of them, and now she's still screaming. In fact, today my 5-year-old came home from 3 hours of school, and she did not stop crying on and off for about an hour. And none of us knew why she was crying. Well, this is completely irrational behavior. But we're not going to say to her, oh, you shouldn't cry now. It doesn't make sense. Or, you know, why are you crying, when she can't actually verbalize it? What we do is we say, oh, poor you. You must have had a hard day. You poor thing. Come and have some lunch. I'll read you a story. Distraction can be one method, but first it's the poor you. And if they can verbalize, trying to understand what went on, you know, so-and-so told me that she learned to ride a bike without stabilizers, and I can't ride it yet. And all the girls in my class can ride bikes without stabilizers. I'm the only one who can't. Poor you. You must feel terrible that you can't ride a bike without stabilizers. I feel so sorry for you. I'm sure you want to be able to do that. We're going to have to work on that. And that comes first before, you know, yeah, there might be actually some girls who actually can't. You know, you're only 5. So there's no point with a rational argument when there's an emotional thing going on. So yeah, and it's fine to be clear that you're right, but to know that we're not actually dealing with right here, we're dealing with feelings.
I think that,
yeah, please.
You said something very interesting in the first meeting about emotionally intelligence, developing emotional intelligence in children. And that made me think, because in my generation of bringing up children, you never really admitted that the child had any feelings at all. And I've noticed with my grandchildren, even the one who's only 3, you know, her parents say, how are you feeling? Trying to get her to articulate how she's feeling. And I thought, that is amazing. That is so good. So that a child can begin to think and eventually be able to sort of think more coherently about why they're feeling the way they are, and then to be able to do, and then recognize that in other people. So I don't think we ever learned anything about that, did we? No.
Well, I consider myself very blessed to be living in the times of this generation. Yeah, it's, thank God, it's a blessing to have this awareness. And a lot of this, yeah, I think only really developed in the last 50, 70 years. So, yeah.
Well, yeah.
And when saying something to the other party, to speak in a language that they that they can understand and they're receptive to, not using long terms or whatever. Sometimes when somebody has a good repartee from a professional perspective, and they use terminologies and statements that they would use in a professional meeting, but it's not the sort of thing, the way that you would talk to a sort of normal human being in the living room type of thing. It can be very off-putting and very very distancing to hear somebody talking in terms that that don't relate to their understanding.
Well, I feel like that relates a little bit to last week, what we said about COVID, and knowing who the other person is and relating to that.
Yes.
They are, you know,
Yes.
and if they're professional and you're talking in professional psychological terms, then fine. But if they're not, then you better bring it down. So, yeah. Okay, right. Oh, okay. I'm not going to go into repairs because it's late, and repairs is like a whole other subject. So, so I think what we would do is just pause here and give you a moment to reflect and think, and we can discuss other examples for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to. So just to sum up, what have we said here? We have said that we're going to redefine a good fight as a fight that ends with greater closeness or greater understanding. We've talked about the idea of serving idols as being serving disconnection, which is very often about serving our own egos instead of being there for the other person. We've talked about not blaming the other person and always looking within ourselves to find what it is that I can correct. We've mentioned self-awareness. We've talked about criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And we've mentioned a few ways of avoiding them, being soft startup and listening and empathizing as key skills for making conflict successful. I feel like the time has gone so fast and we haven't got through that much, but at the same time, certain quite important points I think have come out. So please give me reflections, ideas, questions.
I was just curious about that last point about language that's used, and that was being, not using difficult language or whatever. And part of me just wondered, I suppose, one of the reasons that you marry the person that you do is because theoretically you have a level of communication or an understanding that is really strong, and that's one of the bases for getting married to that person. So I suppose if you are having a fight or an argument, whether your language changes just because of the heat of the moment, I don't know. It's not something that was obvious to me, but I can see how maybe it might happen. But on the whole, it probably wouldn't. But yeah, it was just an interesting point about language.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be just more of an individual thing, or perhaps what happens is that when people get too embroiled in things, then they just cannot see out of themselves and start talking in a different way to how they would normally communicate, and then something goes wrong. Maybe, I don't know. And perhaps Robin wants to explain more what he meant on there, but I think that was what you were saying was based on what Robin said. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering also that if one has a genuine, sincere desire to sort things out and to bring a good result, it could be that none of this issue would come about. But if somebody has a very negative attitude to the whole discussion, doesn't feel they really particularly want to take part in it anyway, they might just become obnoxious in their wording and the way they present themselves, and the way and try and make the other person look small, belittled, and at a loss.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And what one of the things that Gottman says about people fighting and about marriages is that he says that sometimes couples therapists think that if only they would just improve the couple's communication, then everything would be fine. And he says that this is a misconception because there's a lot more than communication at stake. And really what you need is a very sound and strong basis of trust and love and connection and positivity. And the more all of that is built up, then in quite a natural way, then arguments can be communicated in a very positive way. And a lot of these kind of danger signs can be naturally avoided because you care and you don't want to hurt the other, and you're automatically trying to avoid escalating conflicts. And so therefore there's kind of two different ways you could work on improving the way that a couple deals with conflicts. One way you could deal with it is head on by trying to, not do a harsh startup, do a soft startup, try to empathize, try to listen, etc., etc. Or alternatively, don't deal with the conflict at all. Just strengthen your positive feelings about your spouse. Strengthen your how you respond to their bids for your attention. Be there for them throughout the day. Send them messages, give them phone calls, show them your care and your love. Respect them, have positive thoughts about them. Think about how special they are. Remember all the things they've done for you, and balloon it in your mind in all the detail and visualize it and bring it all back. And when you do all of these on a regular basis daily, then for most people, when all these problematic conflict areas might not have to be dealt with head on as much. And I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
There's another issue that comes to mind regarding the total process that's occurring in marriage and a marital relationship. I think I learnt this from Rabbi Tat some yonks ago, that when we first go into a relationship, and which continues into the early times of marriage, there's a certain things. There are things driving us, that running through us, our hormones and whatever, that as it were, blind us to other aspects of the reality of living with, coping with, and surviving with the other person. And when we've been in a marriage for some time, these aspects which helped us in the first place are slowly drained away. Yes, we did discuss it.
We mentioned that when we talked about.
Yes, and then we're left to our own devices. And sadly, when we're left to our own devices, it's where we can go completely wrong.
Well, I think to sum up what you've said and what we've been saying, a good marriage is going to require constant attention and thought and effort, and it will reap tremendous rewards.
Yes, beautifully put. Yes.
Okay, I think we're going to have to end here because we have gone over time. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining and being part of this course. And I really enjoyed meeting you all and getting to know you all. And please feel free to stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sad we're ending. God bless us.
Yeah, see if you can come back again.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
To everybody. Okay.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thank you, Rivka.
Pleasure. Oh, hello. Hello.
Hi.
Bye.
Sorry,
How are you
I
doing?
was listening. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. You're right.
Yeah, good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Oh, pleasure. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Okay. Cool. Good.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your contributions.
Nice to
All the best.
So we look
You
forward
too.
to soon.
Yeah. All the best to you.
Lovely.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Done.